I'll call this regular meeting of the Planning Board to order. Will please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Mary, I wonder if you could call roll just so we have it for the record.
John Snello.
Here.
Kevin. I don't know why I have a hard time with your last name. Kevin.
Present.
Mike Nasway.
Present.
Chris Greer.
Present.
Donna Freeling.
Freiling.
Friday.
Present.
Friday. Johanna Bach.
Here.
Terry King is unable to make it tonight, and Mark Jenkins is unable to make it tonight.
And Greg is, Humphrey's on vacation.
Yeah.
So thanks for that. Our first order of business is approval of the minutes. You all should have received them via email. I think Chris, you probably didn't. Mary, apparently Chris is not on our regular email list. We'll check after the meeting, but
He should be. I must have the wrong one.
could happen. I think, were we all here last night? Okay. Any questions on that? It was pretty detailed on the various comments and I think captured well. If there's no other discussion, have a motion to approve the minutes. Mike? Second? Kevin? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Abstentions? Thank you. We have old business, and at our last meeting, seems a lot has happened in the last month. It seems like more than that. The folks from Christopher Communities were here to talk about 104 Smoky Hollow Road, the La Madre Landing. Since we last met, the folks from Christopher Communities submitted an updated version of the proposed map. Just as a reminder, some of the discussion last time, Mike and others had concerns about the parking lot, the position, et cetera. At this point, this is informational, so we'll hear from you again, which is great. The board is not taking action this evening. There are a couple things that we still need to request and that sort of thing. But we're certainly open to having you provide an update on the proposal. So I'll give the floor to you.
All right, perfect. Good evening, board members. I'm David Cox with Pastoral Associates, the civil engineer for the project. And also with me, I have Justin Rudgick and Audrey here. They're both with Christopher Communities. Before I get into kind of what we revised, I'll just let Justin Rudgick here say a few words. He is the president and CEO of Christopher Communities, so I figured you might want to just hear what he has to say. So.
Thank you, David. It's a pleasure to be here in front of the board. I apologize for not being here at the last meeting. So my name is Justin Rudgick. I'm the president and CEO of Christopher Community, and I'm very excited about this opportunity to develop this type of project in the village of Baldwinsville. Christopher Community is a non-for-profit organization. We have over 50 years of service to the community all across upstate New York. We are a housing development and property management company. And so we're a non-for-profit organization. We have over 3,200 units that we professionally manage and have developed across the state. 85% of those 3,200 units are right here in central New York, right in Onondaga County. And we also manage the property adjacent to the proposed La Madre Landing, which is St. Mary's Apartments. And so from a neighborly standpoint and from an overall development concept, it would beneficial to Christopher Community and to develop housing for the community next to St. Mary's Apartments. So in terms of the overall project summary, we're proposing a project that is really geared towards supportive housing for individuals with developmental disabilities. And this has been an ongoing project that started even before Christopher Community became involved with a couple of our parents that were really interested in trying to meet an unmet demand in the community for housing for the individuals with developmental disabilities, namely the adult children, 25, 30 years old, that really didn't want to necessarily live with them in perpetuity, or something happened to them when they was 50, 60, 70 years old, and now they were essentially become burdened with the state. And so this type of independent supportive housing allows for that opportunity with support services through Advocates Incorporated to allow for that continuous improvement and continuous living situation in the community. And Christopher community does manage St. Mary's, and as far as I understand, the reputation here in the community has been very positive in our management of St. Mary's as a affordable housing project for seniors, 55 and older. So we're modular landing specifically for individuals with developmental disabilities, and providing affordable housing is much of the same type of thing in terms of that project. So again, we're very excited, and I know we heard some of the concerns at the last meeting. We made some additional revisions and adaptations, and I'm definitely open to additional feedback because we want to be partners in the community.
Great, thanks very much, Justin, I appreciate it.
So the last time we were here before the board, we heard loud and clear, increase the buffer to the neighbors to the north. That was really the main theme there. So we went back, and this on top here, that's what we came in with a month ago, which only had a 10-foot buffer, had a double row, or up against parking on both sides of the drive aisle up top there. So we actually prepared two different concepts.
Excuse me, would you mind sort of bringing that up so that
Absolutely, I would.
everyone can see it?
Yeah, and we all have copies of that, so if you wanted to turn and actually.
Yeah. And the one concept the second concept you don't have copies of yet, but I will run through that one. It's just modify it a little bit. Sorry, I have my back to you.
No worries.
So I'll try to spin it around and show both. So what we did was, this right here, I'll try to back up a little bit, was we came up with a option. Instead of having the parking on the north side, we flipped the parking and put it on the south side. So we put it essentially just 1 foot off the property line, got as close to that southern property line as we could, and just did one row of parking on the drive out. So with the building now, the building here is 50 feet away from the property line.
Make sure the audience can see that.
Yep. So so we went from a 10-foot setback to the parking to now a 50-foot setback to the building, and we have we put some additional parking over here, which we have a 40-foot setback to the parking, and proposed a fence along the parking. That was also one of the comments that got brought up. So that's a substantial improvement of increasing that that vegetated buffer there. And then on a second concept, we just looked at very similar to the last one, the original concept, but we just removed the parking at the top. So this one we're able to provide 30-foot buffer there to the parking, because we also heard that some members from the board and the public said they'd rather have a parking lot right close to the neighbors as opposed to a building. So we at least wanted to show both options of what we could do there. So we got rid of that parking on the top and then provided that additional parking on the side there. And that would have a fence all along that parking area as well, and provide 30-foot of buffer there. One of the other comments too was about wetlands, that there could be wetlands to the east. So we have contracted with a wetland biologist. They have not gone out there yet, but it is on the calendar, it's on the schedule for them to go out there and confirm any wetlands on the property. So we're just really trying to get these kind of kinks worked out before we go through and design the whole thing and then have to redesign it. So we find it very beneficial to get feedback from the public and the boards up front before we go ahead and design things.
And just to add one more thing, regarding option one that David initially showed you, it really pretty much mirrors the parking arrangement that we have already established at St. Mary's Apartments, having a front, the street at Smoky Hollow. So we kind of replicated that to kind of create that synergy and that symmetry. So that was one of the reasons why I thought that was a good option to present to the board, because it was essentially one that's already established with the St. Mary Departments.
Thank you. Any questions for David on this? I just had, I'll invite public comment in a bit. There's a tremendous amount of trees and foliage in that existing property line and well beyond it. The 50-foot setback, because I was actually walking down that way, do you have a plan for keeping those trees and that foliage, or removing it, or have you gotten that far? Because right now, today, those woods, I would call them as a kid, those woods behind the folks that live on the other side are pretty thick and dense, and obviously create a nice buffer at that point. Maybe you could just speak to that.
Yeah, for sure. So we want to preserve absolutely as much as we can. With the building set up 50 feet, we probably need to maintain at least 10 feet of clear area for building, for construction, scaffolding, anything like that. So we'd probably be able to maintain around a 40-foot strip there along the building of no disturbance, if you will.
From the property line in?
Yeah, would be a 40-foot. And then on this, I guess on this concept here, that with the parking, it would be pretty close to 30, because just having a parking lot, you don't really need to have much grading beyond the curb line. So just a couple feet beyond the curb line would be enough to be able to construct that parking.
Do you have a question, Mike? Oh. Any other questions or thoughts on the proposals?
Personally, I'd like to see as much of that tree line along those back properties of the Campbell development remain. I mean, you're going to put a 2-story building overlooking their backyards. And admittedly, from mid-October until about the 1st of May, with no leaves on the trees, they're overlooking these folks' backyards. And, there's a certain privacy that they have now that the new building is going to, I don't want to say invade, but it will affect their privacy. And I'd like to see that as much of their privacy maintained as possible.
Absolutely.
Yeah, just a question to clarify on the second option that you were just speaking to, since we have a hard copy of option 3. So option 2, maintain the parking lot adjacent to the properties of the homeowners. That's a 30-foot buffer you have from the property line to where the parking lot would start. And option 3 is 50 feet. This is option 2 is 30 feet.
Yep, so 30 feet. Now, I do have to say, the building is 50-foot setback, but this little bit of parking here is 40 feet.
Okay.
So the building's 50, but in this option, the parking is 40 feet. So we'd be maintaining kind of a 40-foot strip for that, and then that 10-foot for the building.
And with the second option, you have eliminated some of those parking spots that would, I guess if you were parking in, you would be shining headlights into those homes.
Right.
Would there be a fence there? We
Yep,
talked about,
there'd be a
okay, so a
fence along
fence,
there.
okay.
So, and all the cars would be pulling in towards the building, so the headlights would be pointed away from the neighbors. So there wouldn't be any parking spaces pointed towards the neighbors.
Great. Did you have a question? If there are no other questions, I will open it to public comment. In order, I need you, if you're going to speak, to actually come forward, because we have a recorder here, not to stand before me like we're in court, but to stand sort of close up. Please provide your name and address, and please spell your name for the record. That's something that we have to do. And please limit your comments to about 3 minutes or so. Do you want me to turn this, Mary?
It's already on. Oh, yeah.
Will it pick up better, so on that, that's probably good if you speak up loudly, yep.
My name is Rich Bernardin, last name Bernardin.
Thank you.
10 Edgewood Drive, back up to the property. First of all, I'd like to thank you for listening and adjusting the plans to what you heard. I appreciate that. My one concern is, I appreciate the setbacks that you put. That hedgerow that's there is probably a good 20 foot, 15 to 20 foot from the property line. So when you're talking about a 30-foot setback, you're only talking about maybe a 10-foot hedgerow, which is better than nothing, I'll give you that. But it's not, the hedgerow doesn't go all the way to the property line. So when he's talking about a 30-foot setback, he's only talking about like a 10-foot wide buffer. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I'm just trying to, because it's talking about 30 feet into.
From the property line.
Right.
In the back of your backyard, there's 20 feet of clear
Of clear
space before you get the
hedgerow,
trees. Okay.
And then, so it's again, better than it was, and I appreciate that. But we're only talking about a 10-foot, so that's that. My other concern is the building, if it's built on the north side of the property, is going to be built on a 10-foot elevation to my property. So although we're talking about a 2-story building, if I'm standing in my backyard, the walkout is 10 foot up. So the second story is actually a 3rd-story building to my backyard. So again, to the privacy issue, we have to just, I expect some kind of privacy, but we're really talking about a 3-story building, not a 2-story building, if you're in my backyard. So again, thank you for your time. I appreciate you addressing the concerns.
I will comment on that, so this kind of shows the tree line. So for these first 3 properties, the tree line is close to the property line, but then it does dip down for these 3 properties. So in that area where it dips down, we could plant, evergreens and some type of trees like that that would provide year-round screening, if you will. So yeah, we would like to fill in kind of this more open area with landscaping in there to, like you said, so that we have more than just 10 feet. Yep, and then I'll show that.
The other, just for information, as part of this process, the planning board will request aerial and topographical maps that illustrate any elevation changes and things like that. So, that'll be part of the process.
For sure.
It's hard to tell by looking.
For these first 3 properties, the tree line is pretty close to the property line, but then for these 3, it really does, like you said, drops down. So for these 3 properties, we would really want to fill this in with some evergreens.
Would you maintain these trees here, or are they just there because they're on the property currently?
Yeah, they're on the property currently, we may just maintain them. And
Okay.
not put those down.
So, I guess I'd have a question. When you do your site work, you're gonna, is that, well, we don't know now because I haven't seen the aerial picture, and I haven't been able to walk that, but would you take any of that material and level it and move it forward for parking to bring a grade for any of that, or is that already kind of as is?
So this site is relatively flat.
Flat, okay. I haven't been down in there physically. I've drove by 2 or 3 times, but never been in to walk where John was talking the woods and so on.
Yeah, it's really flat on, it doesn't, so this plan.
So your site work wouldn't level any of that 10-foot elevation that gentleman was
No.
talking about? Okay.
No, it'd be pretty
Okay.
close to the existing grade.
Okay.
And the grade's really flat up here, it's just, once you get past east of the building, then it does start to drop off,
But you're not gonna
but we're not.
peeling any of that off and moving it down there, especially if there's wetlands there, you're not gonna be able to.
Right.
If.
Is there, for the residents there, is there a berm, like at the back of your yards? It's obviously wooded. Is there like a berm?
Yes.
And it rises like that? Like
It's a pretty steep grade. That's why I could measure that it's about 10 and a half feet.
Right.
From the bottom to the top. It's a pretty steep.
it's obscured, of course, by the woods. Good,
No,
thank you.
it's literally in.
I mean, someone walking by, looking, it
would
looks
see
like
it.
woods, yeah.
No, it would.
You can see the berm,
and then
right.
they see the wood, yeah.
Yeah. Anyone else? Please. Thank you.
Hi, Betsy Bernardin, 10 Edgewood Drive. I really wanted to, once again, thank you for listening to us and our concerns. Really don't want it in my backyard, but we understood when the firehouse tried to go there that this was a PPD and that's what it's for and that's what you're using it for. One of the things that I'd like to say and mention is it really necessary, this large of a facility in this small area in this community? Okay, that's a concern that I have. Did you go out in the Baldwinsville area and actually survey what the need is for Baldwinsville?
We did. We did a preliminary market study, and that market study came back and said there was an unmet demand for the residents that were proposing to serve at that project.
Okay, so there's going to be people from Baldwinsville that are going to utilize 100% of this facility, or are these people that are coming in from outside going to be utilizing this facility?
So the primary market area is Central New York. So Central New York, which is Onondaga County. So that would be, I mean, the state does not allow us to restrict it to just Baldwinsville.
Okay.
So I mean, that's
And I can appreciate that, but also as the property, as you look at that property, it's 6 acres, but we don't need to use all 6 acres for this type of a facility in that small area, is my opinion. I just want to make that record, okay? A couple of other things that I'd like to ask is you have 35 one-bedroom apartments and 17 two-bedroom apartments. Can you help me understand the people that are living in those apartments? So the one-bedroom apartments, can you give me an age range? You know, you had mentioned they're on their own, that type of thing. The two-bedroom apartments, is that a parent and a child?
So the two-bedroom model with the individuals with developmental disabilities would be a roommate situation. So what we did, we designed a two-bedroom adjacent to a one-bedroom to allow for essentially 24/7 staffing, to allow for the 3-to-1 ratio, so to speak. So we have one individual living in a one-bedroom, 2 individuals living in a two-bedroom. There would be roommates and be sharing staff to allow for that 24/7 supervision.
Okay. The next question that I have is the staffing. What kind of staffing? Is this nurses? Is it maintenance? Is it manager? Is it security? What is the staffing that makes up?
So Christopher Community will provide a full-time property manager on site as we do for St. Mary's Department, a full-time maintenance superintendent as we do for St. Mary's Department, and then in addition to that, every resident through the self-direction budget or self-direction program with OPWDD, they provide essentially one-on-one or one-on-two staffing that is separate from the project that comes with them specifically to carry out their individual goals and their daily living skills. And on top of that, advocates were in the process of applying for funding to have a full-time resident coordinator to oversee the individuals with developmental disability, to manage a shift schedule and those kind of things. So we will have a full-time property manager on site, a full-time maintenance staff on site, and then in addition to every single resident that is individual with developmental disability will have a staff member or 2 essentially round the clock providing the daily care and living skills for them.
And do you know these other facilities that you have, what is the percentage of people that are actually out in the community working, these people?
Well, the individuals with developmental disabilities, I mean, most of the time they are volunteering in the community because they have developmental disability.
Right, okay.
So they're volunteering, or they participate in a day hab program, or they're doing a activity. I mean, one of the projects that we're developing a community room, and that community room would have hands-on training and teaching and those kind of things. So part of that overall, for the individuals with developmental disability, I mean, I would say probably less than 10% would actually have a job because they would have supportive employment. That's a different benchmark all in itself, but they would provide volunteer services. I mean, the goal is to try to become independent if possible with support services. The part of this project is to provide that continuous support services where if they otherwise lived at home, they wouldn't have that support services. Now we're providing that support services so they can live with dignity and have the affordable housing arrangements as well.
Thank you, I appreciate that. Getting back to the map, I would appreciate and I do appreciate the buffer that you're gonna give with the greenery, but specifically where my house is, because of that berm, I would also appreciate a fence in that area,
Okay.
if that is possible. Okay.
Thank you.
That's all I have. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Is there anyone else that would like to?
Just one last question, and I forgot to ask it. On the bottom proposal, there's an egress in the northeast corner. Is that an emergency exit, or is that an egress for people to just come and go into the green space?
Oh, over here you're saying?
No, I think either here or here. Oh, that is a patio area. That wasn't okay. So that is a patio area, so it's not an emergency exit.
Correct.
Can I ask one more question? The playground that's on here.
Yep.
So what type of playground is that? Young kids?
It's designed as what's called a tot lot, but we are incorporating swings for the individuals with developmental disabilities because they like that vestibular motion, and so we are adding swing to that, but it's more of a tot lot kind of design.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions for the folks from Christopher Communities? Sir.
Everyone. My name is William Weiler. I own property at 101 Smoky Hollow and 103 Smoky Hollow Road. Had a couple questions regarding some of the engineering here. Traffic. Notice there are several parking spaces. Are those folks individuals going to be driving in and out of a shared ingress and egress and a curb cut on Smoky Hollow Road?
So it's gonna,
Go ahead, Dave.
yeah, it's gonna utilize the existing entrance for St. Mary's.
Okay.
So no new curb cuts.
So I guess the next question is, how is that traffic going to be managed on the site? We have elderly folks that are still very mobile, and then folks coming in and out. How is that going to be kind of managed?
Yeah, so both these projects have relatively low traffic generation, especially during peak hour times. So that a lot of, especially with seniors, they're kind of going out off-peak hours. You know, they wait for the morning rush to go before they get out, and then they're usually back before the evening rush. And then this project, similar, it doesn't generate a tremendous amount of traffic, so that there won't be any issues between the two projects sharing one entrance at all.
Okay. Another thing to note, the lot across the street at 101 and that whole west side of Smoky Hollow Road is within a New York State designated wetland watch area, and that extends 100 feet past the current, the watch area has to be gone through with the DEC of New York State. So that also would apply to the wetlands behind the property on the east side.
Right, and as part of this, they would have to adhere to seeker, which is that state environmental quality review, and
Yeah.
and those various aspects.
Utility infrastructure, you know, the power poles on Smoky Hollow Road are quite strained, as you may notice. Is there a plan to bolster that in order to support this big facility?
So we have not had any communications with the utility company yet, but as we get into the design, we coordinate with them. We let them know what our loads are, and they, you know, say whether there's, you know, adequate capacity in the existing infrastructure. If not, then they'll need to do some type of upgrades.
Okay. Drainage is also obviously going to have to be addressed with any elevations. I've heard from others in the neighborhood that drainage is an issue in the existing neighborhood. So that's another consideration that may be exacerbated by, you know, leveling and changing the grades in certain areas. As regard to the actual, to Christopher Communities, tenant qualifications and visitors, those type of folks, you know, is that going to be managed in a judicious manner? How is that going to be controlled? And this also refers back to the traffic and any of the additional traffic that may be incurred on Smoky Hollow Road.
So in terms of visitors, I mean, we can't restrict visitors. I mean, so if an individual with developmental disability has a parent that wants to come and visit them, they're obviously going to come and visit them. But I mean, what they typically do is they would have a worker, because sometimes the parents are the legal guardian of the individual or not. So they would have a record in the property management office if they're able to come into the property. But I mean, most of the time with the individuals, they're essentially escorted by the actual resident. And so if we find that there is a tenant that has a resident that's kind of wandering around, that's not where they're supposed to be, that could become, it's a violation of our house rules.
Right.
And so it could be a lease violation, and we can essentially write them up for those kind of things. It generally doesn't happen that often because people want to have that, but we do have, I mean, our house rules are essentially 25 pages long, and part of that is governed by the state as well as our own internal process. But we do have house rules, and we do, I mean, we know from a property management company, if we know that one bad tenant or one bad resident can drive away 10 good ones. So we want to make sure we're always active, and that's one of the reasons why we always have a full-time property manager on staff or on site. Because this type of project, you know, being 50 units, 53 units, you can make that argument whether it justifies a part-time or a full-time manager, and we say we're going to cut to the chase and have a full-time dedicated property manager on site, so that way we always have eyes and ears on that property all the time. And especially our maintenance, with they're on call and they're there, and so it's always a continuous flow.
Okay, thanks. One last question for the board. Has there been any consideration on this project with regard to its vicinity to the school system that is adjacent to this property?
In which way?
As far as, you know, increased people in the
Traffic
area,
and things.
traffic, a lot of students walking to school.
There was some mention, I think, at last meeting that kids potentially cut through currently, and you know that would need to be something we would have to look at, obviously, and you know, it is private property, but you know when a property is empty for decades, people just sort of take it for granted. But that would be something we would also look at. I think that southeastern part of the property is, you know, potentially least trafficked and used within this plan, but it is the one that is closest to the school.
All right, thank you all.
Thank you very much.
And if I could add a comment or two regarding the overall site and the scope and size of the project. I mean, we thought long and hard about the overall site. I mean, 6 acres is, you know, from a development standpoint, it's a lot of land, right? You know, you can really cram a lot of stuff in there. And we could have easily developed something in the back part of that area, even though the topography is higher. I mean, there was the initial concept of, you know, potentially doing cottage houses back there, those kind of different kinds of ideas. But we wanted to really keep the symmetry similar to St. Mary's apartment, which is already existing, and to have the existing L-shaped kind of footprint to be similar, so that way you already have that. I mean, for me, I want to make sure that we are trying to maximize our square footage with the least amount of intrusion as possible. So when we talk about green space and those kind of things, I want to have as much green space as possible. You know, selfishly, I mean, it's cheaper, right? You know, if we're not cutting down a whole bunch of trees, not clear cutting, all those kind of different things, if we're able to mitigate and minimize those kind of things, it's better for us, and it's also better for the community. And that's one of the things that we talked about in the green space area and the wooded area in the back, is, you know, adding essentially walking trails or something like that, which, you know, we could essentially, you know, one of the projects that we did in Marcellus, we had an agreement or an easement with the local municipality to allow for the extension of the creek walk, right? And so, I mean, we can kind of do something like that that really becomes, you know, a concern from the residents that there's a lot of kids or people that are accessing the backwoods area to get to, whether to the school campus or something. But, I mean, those are some of the things that we have to talk about in terms of liabilities and those kind of things. But, I mean, we really want to make sure that we're being, you know, paying attention to the scale and density of that neighborhood. And so, I mean, this project, in my opinion, is appropriately sized because of St. Mary's next door. I mean, St. Mary's has been in existence for a very long time. And so I think, you know, just having that area and that symmetry allows for a conducive project.
Thank you. And I will add, just as a point of information, this is a PDD, a a planned development district. It's zoned in a way that allows this kind of project, but also a PDD is a little different from, say, an R2. It grants the village much more input into the actual project design and all that sort of thing. So this is a pretty, as our council would say, a progressive approach to the planning, so that that there is truly a partnership, and it is project specific that way. So just to allay some of those. You had some questions? If you
My name is Doris Jarvis, Jarvis. We're actually directly behind where you just said that this is gonna be a patio right here. Okay, because that's right in my backyard. Now, I see that you have one patio right here. I was just confused why we need two when right in somebody's backyard. So you said there's gonna be a fence that's going right, so that patio right there is gonna be a fence there?
Yeah, so depending on which concept we go with, if we went with this concept, there would not be any patio there.
Okay.
But with this concept here, you know, we could put a fence along this property line here.
Okay.
To help block
Okay.
and screen.
So now the patio is gonna be just as big as the one on the side?
No, this one is a much smaller
Okay.
one.
Okay, and they can just come in and out as they please. Now, I have one question. This building, I'm pretty familiar with you guys, is the same building that's on Catherine Street in Syracuse? Same kind of thing?
No, I wouldn't agree with that, but no, but go ahead, I'm sorry.
No, so it's not the same kind of individuals that you guys have, or it's not?
You talk about the population, and you talk about the building design?
No, not the building design.
The population.
Right.
No, so we do affordable housing, right, and so it's lower to moderate income housing,
Mhm.
and so by the nature of this particular project, it's supportive housing with individuals with developmental disabilities, and so because they're individuals with developmental disabilities are on a fixed income anyway, so they fall under the guise of affordable housing, so it's a different type of population than the typical, the Catherine Street one is more of a family housing type of project, and it's in the city, so it's a little bit different.
Right.
So this one is more, very similar, not necessarily in demographic to St. Mary's, but the same type of impact, I would argue, it's to St. Mary's in terms of the type of residents that are coming in and living at that facility.
Okay, just because, I have 4 small kids,
Yes.
so I do, not only is, they can basically walk into my backyard, so I don't want to have to worry about that on top of that. So, but, okay, all right, thank you.
Thank you. Okay, any other questions or thoughts on that?
I have a question.
Oh, Jamie.
About the amount of parking. Is that a necessary number or something you find is necessary? Or are you doing it for some reason that you think this board wants that number?
So as we were mentioning before, you know, for the people that have, you know, developmental disabilities, you know, they have that staff person, you know, that support staff, so they're gonna need a parking
So
space. So every unit essentially
needs
has
one.
a parking space.
So you're fine, very similar to St. Mary's, that parking lot is not full on any given day. Just affordable housing in general, less than half of the parking is utilized by the residents. So in this case, we did a 1-for-1 parking because, well, at the very least, the state requires it. But if the board, from a variance standpoint, said, no, we think it would be better to have 45 spaces or 40, we definitely will work with that and incorporate that as long as we have local approval to indicate that we have the parking variance. But
Well, I guess that's the question. If you really don't think that you're going to need 51, might this board be interested in a reduced parking that would create more buffering?
For banking, for banking park.
Right.
Yeah.
Putting in reserve.
Need it, but let's plan for it.
And we've done a couple of projects where we banked parking before, where we kind of carved it off and said, you know, if we need it, we can do it, and it kind of counts towards that overall number, just in case. We're definitely,
I'd like to do less parking just because, I mean, it's not, I mean, I think having a big parking lot is just not, it's unsightly, right? And so if we're able to do that, but at the same time, because of this population with the support service staff, we're trying to be cautious to make sure that we don't run into an overflow issue either. So we wanna, I mean, we just don't know what we don't know, and so we are on the side of caution of 1 for 1 at this point. But I think, you know, if we reduce it by 5 or 10, I don't think it's gonna really impact the project overall, because at the very least, we do have that overflow parking at St. Mary's.
Yeah, I think that that would be something that if in one of your preliminary designs that you wanted to put forward, you know, some of us live over near St. Mary's, and it is often not exactly empty, but never full. And, you know, from an aesthetics and just, you know, a practical space, I think members of, if there's no objections, that we would, you know, entertain something like that based on your best guesses on what's really needed, banking, so that kind of thing. I think that's reasonable.
John, just a question back to that other lady's statement about the residents. These will all be independent, not adolescents, obviously, 18, 21 to
Yeah, so
55?
18 to 55 and older.
Okay. So these are children, as you're saying, that live with their parents now, that could be out on their own if they had some type of maintained help.
Yeah.
Okay, because I have a friend that has a child, and they're already planning to keep her in the home when they pass on and have an older, younger brother or sister come and live in the home and maintain her. Because she really can't be out on her own, but she'd like to be, but she doesn't know where to go, so I see the need.
So there's definitely.
But there won't be children, I mean, these could, I mean, the tenants won't necessarily have children. Okay.
No. I mean, so, I mean, I can speak to that personally. I mean, I have 2 boys with autism, and, you know, and so I have 5 kids all in all. So 2 of them have autism, and they're 25 and 26 years old.
Right.
And so for me, from a parent standpoint, I want to make sure that I provide them with housing that is not relying on me as a parent, that when I'm 70 years old and something happened to me at any given moment, now nobody knows how to take care of them or whatever. So this type of project to provide that housing allows for that independent, continuous living environment that really safeguards the dignity of everyone that's involved. It's kind of, I mean, it's personal because I know, I mean, right now the state is not funding certified facilities anymore, sort of the individual residential alternative, which is called IRAs. They're not building those anymore, so they're kind of pushing towards the independent support services model, which is what we're proposing as an organization. I mean, there are some challenges with that in terms of staffing and those kind of things, because with a certified facility, I mean, you have the continuous funding of Medicaid and Medicare and the state. This is not that type of project where we're relying on that to be able to move forward, but it still allows for that opportunity to think creatively on how do we meet the need that we know in this community that exists. I mean, Advocates Incorporated, as our support service partner, services over 1,000 families in Onondaga County, and they provide right now over 100 non-certified housing arrangements for out of those 1,000 families, and there's easily 200 more families in Onondaga County that would definitely would desire that type of project. And I know for a fact there's at least 20 of them that live in the Baldwinville, Lysander area that are a client of Advocates Incorporated. And I'm one of them, so.
Thank you.
I just had another question.
Sure,
So,
Jamie.
I'm sorry, it was the last meeting. But was there any discussion about the building moving closer to the road and the parking being more to the St. Mary's side? And was everyone happy with this parking field more toward the Smoky Hollow Road?
Yeah, the original layout had, I guess, the portion of the lot that was on the north end of the building is pretty much the same, but the actual long part of the lot was on the east side. We didn't discuss its location, its setback, other than the building basically aligns with the existing St. Mary's setback. And
So that was my question for the board, if that was, just because village frontages tend to be anchored at the street,
right.
right?
And I think this was an attempt to match the current setback. It's something that we've begun some very, very preliminary conversations about, of the setbacks in the village right now for new construction, not, I keep getting this, single-family homes, things like that, is much more of a suburban kind of setback, and we're looking at, is that appropriate? So it is possible, particularly with this setback, like St. Mary's is very far back, even farther than that requirement. That's, I think, a good question, and I don't know if others here on the board have any thoughts on that footprint aspect. Whether that makes a difference to what you're planning and things like that.
Yeah, so there, just to talk about, we are limited somewhat, so the property line actually does have a jog here. So we do, so our setback is actually off this internal line, because it does jog there, so we are limited somewhat in what we can do there. But with St. Mary's being relatively close, we didn't want a drastic change, so we wanted it, to be somewhat similar.
Great. Any other questions on that? If not,
I would love some feedback from the board and also the public. We have two different options here. If there was kind of one option that people were kind of more leaning towards.
it wouldn't be scientific. In walking over there, in that neighborhood, having the physical building further away now. Like in the original design, it was the building was actually further away from the property line, but the parking lot was closer. And I know there were folks at the last meeting that said, they would prefer to have the building further away. There's a lot to be said from my perspective of having the parking centrally located rather than that being the abutting, because essentially you'd have lawn that would abut the property line rather than a thin berm from the parking lot to, still 30 feet or whatever it happens to be, but from that aspect.
Right.
The benefit of something that's set back or further forward, if the parking lot's behind, parking lots are more invisible to passersby, which is generally what the village looks for. But in this circumstance, the parking lot is most in the faces of the other residents. So, and the traffic there is, viewing a piece of parking lot, I don't think is a bad thing on either place. Like I don't have a personal opinion on where the parking lot goes or the building goes based on the setbacks. You've moved them away from the property line, and we're talking about maintaining the forestation there.
Just a question, because obviously there's a privacy concern, so maybe, to clarify, how many units would have windows on that side that would be like overlooking the houses to the north there? Because obviously not all 51 units are going to have the windows on that side, correct? So, approximately how many windows of units would there be of people overlooking those houses?
I'm just rough, maybe 18.
18, okay.
That's a rough guess.
Sure, yeah.
Building sizes,
Yeah.
but, yeah.
Right.
Okay.
And again, John, the last meeting, we had quite a bit of residents that didn't like the parking lot because of the lighting you would need, and that would be in their windows. So now with it on the other side, I would think the lighting refracting into their back windows, backyards would be quite a bit less, having the parking lot that way.
be less. I've been at 10 Edgewood Drive for 25 years. We have been there for 25 years. We put a beautiful addition on the back of our house, and I have all windows on the back of our house with no
Sure.
curtains.
Right.
I now need to put curtains on my windows because I do not want to look at a building. I mean, that's not going to happen for 6 months out of the year. I know that that might not mean much to all of you, but when I put that addition on, I love that black backyard, and that's not what it is going to be, and that's unfortunate.
Did you have a preference on the options?
I would have a preference, no, I do not have a preference on that. I have a preference that it's a one-story building would be my preference. I understand that it needs to be there, I understand what the property is for. One floor would be my preference.
Thank you.
Just a general question about the traffic. You said every resident would have a support person coming. So would that mean like a 3 shift changes for each individual person to have their support person come?
Ma'am, can we get your name and address for the record, please?
It's Casey Rogers at 105 Smoky Hollow Road.
Thank you.
Yeah, so that would be, I mean, every individual, so what they engage in is person-centered planning. So every individual has its own plan of the staffing and those kind of things. So in a basic conceptual way, it would be essentially, 3 different shifts that would come in and kind of maintain that continuous support services. But it's not going to be the same 3 shifts for every single individual.
Okay.
Because some individuals might only need 10 hours of supervision, and some might need 24 hours of supervision. So it really depends on the nature of that particular individual. Because some individuals are more higher functioning than others. The ones that are not as high functioning would have more of essentially 24/7 supervision.
Okay, I thought you said everybody.
Well, I mean, everybody, well, I mean, they would have it, but it's really based on the person-centered planning of where they fall into the autism spectrum and those kind of things. If they can be, left unsupervised in the evening, but we have that resident coordinator that will be there kind of floating and roaming, but they don't necessarily need, if there was a fire or an emergency, they don't need a staff member to pull them out, but they would know that they need to leave the building, right? Does that kind of make sense?
Yeah.
So the ones that are lower functioning would need somebody to be there physically and say, hey, we need to go, and prompt them to leave.
Rich Bernard, 10 Edgewood Drive, just because I know you're looking for an answer to your pointed question. I think depending on how much forestry remains and how thick it is and how tall it is would gauge my orientation. Initially, I'm gonna say that I want the parking lot backed up to me because you're gonna put up a fence and then the angle of the second floor then into my backyard is a lot lower and would be obscured by not only the fence but some of the hedgerow versus the building in my backyard where that angle from the second floor is a lot higher. So the hedgerow and the fence would have to be much fuller and much taller. Also knowing that, again, what is left of the hedgerow, when it comes down to budget and all said and done and things get expensive and the cost of building goes up, what kind of landscaping are we, I'll use a bad word, guaranteed, or what kind of barrier are we guaranteed after the building's built, after the residents are in? Oh, we ran out of money, we're over budget, we don't have the money this year for the pine trees, we'll get them to you.
Yeah, that
Would be a concern.
Yeah, if the project moves forward and they stipulate those aspects, those things happen.
But also, how long would that take to build? I mean, we have to listen to that being built. It's in our backyard.
Plus the construction traffic.
Right.
I'm guessing maybe
14
months.
What I would recommend that might help the board visualize it and make a more educated decision on it is if the developer could bring in a couple of cross sections through there at a 1-to-1 scale. So you have 1 foot horizontally, 1 foot vertically with a typical building height. And then you get the relative elevation change as well as distance or property lines with some scale trees that are there, so, if they're 25, 30, 40 foot tree hedgerow or something, kind of visualize like that. I think it'll help everybody kind of get a perspective for it. I mean, I've got my personal opinions from an engineering standpoint, but I think it might help everybody else kind of visualize it.
Yeah, and there's some pretty mature growth in there. There are tall trees that have been growing there, I'm sure, since you've been living there. And then there's some scrub, sumacs and stuff like that in there as well. I think that's a good point that Greg, our engineer.
Plan on area.
Yeah, that's what we were talking about before, having some of that.
Versus the heavily wooded areas.
Yeah, in the question on the elevation, the topographical, that could help as well, not just for our, but just making that available to folks to, rather than there be anecdotal, we have, these are the angles, this is what's there, this is what we propose keeping of the existing foliage and berm and that kind of stuff. That gives we're moving closer and closer and more expensive for you guys to do those aspects, but I think it's important for people to be able to visualize it in reality, and in situ as well in that property.
Yeah, and if building height and privacy is the major concern, the option where we can get the building furthest from the property line is going to reduce that line of sight, is going to have the most impact as far as on those
right
items.
Especially since you talked about that it's all nose into the building parking.
Right.
That's a substantial difference. I don't know what our requirements are for lighting at that point, but it would suggest that the lighting would be on the building side and not necessarily on the far eastern edge of the lot, if you take my meaning. Sir?
Yes, Nick Del Costello, live at 99 Smoky Hollow Road. I wanted to make sure I piggybacked on your comment there. Currently, right now, as far as the site lighting goes, St. Mary's has about 3, maybe 4, to me, seem like spotlights looking over their parking lot, which I understand fully is for security, but that's where I wanted to ask, if not, just bring up the fact that depending on where the parking lot is, if you're going to have a similar style of site lighting, that is going to shine directly into all of their houses like it does mine right now. So I would definitely do some sort of lighting study in some fashion to light up your parking lot without disturbing them 6 months out of the year for 12 hours a day, for one. That also is one of my concerns as well, depending on how you have your parking at the front of the building, what you're going to be doing for site lighting. And my second point was to comment that you're just tagging on to the curve there of Latimer Way. I would suggest that you possibly re-look at that because observing traffic pattern through there, not that it's a lot, in the past 10 years, it's the type of drivers going through there. And I'm not trying to pick or single any generation out, but wintertime and just 2 cars going through there is very difficult for them. I would suggest maybe working with them in trying to widen that, maybe put some lanes or make it a little less confusing for them. Because I've watched at least once a year someone drives off into the road, off the Latimer Road into the yard, and they're stuck, and they have to have a tow truck pull them out. Thank you.
Good. Thank you.
I was going to say, with respect to lighting, the last time we talked a little bit about shielding of, like, when we're still talking about the parking lot being, abutting Edgewood Drive.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, that could help a lot.
Yeah, so on St. Mary's, That lighting is not dark sky compliant. That was that project was put in before that was a thing.
Oh, right, that was there before me, so I don't have any room
Yeah.
to say anything at all. So
Yeah, and
going forward, hopefully. that can be-
The village standard now is that no light spills beyond the property line. You know, so, and with modern lighting, that's not spotlighting.
LED can be.
You're right. That those are, every project that comes before the planning board, that question comes up, and it's a very, it's probably the single most talked about thing about no one wants a light in their eye. And fortunately nowadays, there are a lot of different lighting designs, plus the technology for the lights themselves, as Kevin said, it is better, so better control. It's bug-free nowadays as well, and things like that, that just make it, but it's an issue that we look at and take very seriously.
Well, lighting was one of the first issues we discussed.
Yeah.
I would just like to open up an invitation to anybody that would like to come view the lot from the Edgewood side. Feel free to contact me. We can walk up through the backyards. You can see where the hedgerow is, where the property line is, where this 30 feet, 50 feet, what kind of trees there are. So the invitation's open. I just, ask that you reach out to me. We'll set up a time and you can come take a look at it firsthand.
Well, we should
Thank
all
you.
walk the site.
Yeah.
I plan on doing it.
That's
so.
what I
I have
Thank
one
you.
more question. So, our last meeting, a gentleman brought up the water drainage, and I believe you said that it was all going towards Smoky Hollow, which is away from my house, that's fine, but those houses sit in water as it is. So I was just thinking, how is that gonna affect those houses?
Again, during site review, during site review and planning, drainage is also, next to lighting is probably the second biggest thing. And often during the project phases, you see improved water runoff and drainage because the site is improved and they're either connect to sanitary sewers or there's dry wells, things like that. But that's something we also look very closely at. No property, light is one thing, but nobody will tolerate having water flowing from one property to another. If you wanted to comment on that,
I will.
David.
So right now, all this area here is undetained, so when it rains, the water's gotta go someplace. So water's going towards Edgewood Drive, it's going towards Overbrook Lane, it's just, that's where it's going when it rains. So what we would do is we would capture all the water that lands on the roof, lands on the parking lot. We capture that, put it through a stormwater management area, so we are storing it up and releasing it at a slow amount. And then it's discharging to Smoky Hollow drainage system on the east side of the road, and it's gonna flow down in front of St. Mary's towards the commercial area. So it's flowing down on that side, away from the residential properties.
Is there any kind of, because I've seen them, but I've never had to live near one, that retention pond that you're proposing on the west side of the parking lot, is there any kind of insect control? I mean, is that gonna be a mosquito haven?
Yes.
Or is that?
So it will not be a detention pond, so it won't have standing water. It'll be a green infrastructure practice, so it's gonna be, have vegetation in there, so that water is meant to, it'll store temporarily when it rains, for 24 hours or something like that, but then it all drains out, filters through the soil media, and then out, so it'll be vegetated, not standing water, so no mosquito issues.
Great.
Have there been any renderings proposed? Architectural renderings?
Not yet, no, so we're still at very concept
Right.
level. We wanna make sure that there's a viability in a project, and, and if, the building shape has to change or something like that, we wouldn't wanna go through that effort of designing the building.
Right, but do you have any, here's what we think we're getting, here's what we built in this part of town, and this is probably what it's gonna look like architecturally?
So the next time we come before the board, we will have, that information.
And then, just so it can be part of the PDD, we should refer that to the ARB for their comments. But again, I understand we're still at a concept
Right.
level. as far as location, so you don't want to get too into that, but it certainly should go to the ARB for
And just-
comment and input, so it can become part of the PDD.
Okay. And the ARB is the Architectural Review Board just for information. Great. Thank you very much. Appreciate all that you've done, and appreciate all the comments too. It's very helpful.
And just going on with the timeline, so we still look at the short form of EAF.
Okay.
Okay, so when, put that on your list. Oh, you have it.
I don't know, I thought I got submitted, but apparently.
That was me, I kind to us.
No, maybe it's just like that.
Well, don't give it to me. Mary, here. Thank you.
But yeah, and then with our next application, it'll be, have a much more detailed information,
Okay,
building
great.
elevations and things like that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Great, thanks. We don't have any new business, but I did want to bring up, and I had Mary print out something I gave to the village board regarding the Phillips Street project. The village board has referred it to the planning board for a recommendation on whether the village should change the zone from R1 to R2 or PDD to accommodate that potential of 140 units in up to 10 buildings over there. We had a meeting with the developer and several folks, and Greg Humphreys was there. My sense right now is that we don't have enough information to make a determination yet. So one of the things in putting this together, I just wanted to summarize sort of what the aspects are. But the things I requested was, in addition to the traffic study that's been conducted by the developer, and we all got copies of that, which I believe is still being reviewed by the county, so I didn't make it all the way to the end, like Mike, of reading that. But to do that, there was also a question at the village board meeting, either the last one, not this most recent, but the previous, about municipal water capacity for that particular project. And there are more than 500 units currently approved and or proposed in the village that would get village water. So I asked that the Public Works provide us and the village board a report on the water capacity. Chuck said that he doesn't see a real problem with that, but he's going to give us some real numbers on what that means. I also requested a report on the estimated annual tax revenue generated by that project. It is not tax exempt. There are vagaries and things the village can do, but based on the value of the property that's being developed, to get at least some kind of estimate, again, as a factor to make a determination, and input from the school district. The developer did have informal conversations with the school district, but to have, again, something in writing that we can look at, act on, and have a little more meat on the bone that way. So no action to be taken at this point. I just wanted to give you an update on that.
Now, I have a concern about the traffic study. I started down through it. The day they did the traffic study was the last full day of school, which anybody taking Regents, I'm going to guess a third of the high school kids took the day off as a study day. I plan on contacting the school to find out what attendance was on that day. And if attendance is down considerably, I consider that traffic study to be invalid. It is not realistic.
One of the things that I mentioned at the meeting the other day, and the mayor was part of it, regardless of whether the Phillips Street project goes forward, I'm of the opinion that the village needs to conduct a traffic study, a larger traffic study that isn't just Oneida and Phillips, 60, Pine Street, those areas, but all the way to the Four Corners here at the intersection. It's clear from, both anecdotally and other things that something bigger is happening, and there's already a problem, regardless of whether this project gets done or not. So I expressed interest to the mayor and through him to the village board of conducting a larger traffic study for the village. I would hate for any developer to be penalized for an existing larger problem. But we also are, again, lacking some of the specifics of what are the problems at the peak times. We do have problems with large trucks going through where they're not supposed to, those kinds of things. So my hope is that we can work with the county and the state in doing that kind of study. Again, not just for this project, but it has a lot to do with this project, but everything that comes after. Any thoughts or comments on any of that?
I mean, I'm glad to hear that, because I mean, we're talking about two specific things, but there's a multitude of things that are happening developmentally. So you have to look at them all,
right,
to really get a good sense, and I think that would probably be a good place to start.
Yeah, and when Greg said the other day that there are over 500 housing units, and that's both single family and apartments, proposed or already approved, what's the impact of that? So we don't have the luxury of looking at one project at a time and adding these things on and then, shrugging. Same thing with the water. It's something to look at. What is the capacity of our physical infrastructure to accommodate these things? These are good problems to have. The village is healthy and people want to live here and build here, and that's a great thing. But we just have to make sure we're doing it right. With that,
I think
go
I
ahead.
just wanted to comment as the board is looking at this zone change recommendation. So the village board wants this board as the planning board, because this is the board that really looks at land use most carefully. How should that land be developed? It appears, I don't know, I've been told, we'll get more input from our engineer and other people, that its viability as an R1 is not substantial. So if it's going to be developed land, right now the board is looking at two options. Will it be a PDD or will it go to the R2 designation? This board has much less control over, if it's a R2, it's like, well, the setback is this, you do that. If you have so much units, PDD, as you can see, is a lot more flexibility. So that's something as you continue to look at it, say maybe it's fine, it's R2 and it's not going to change that much. We were at the meeting, Greg and I with the developer, they seemed open to either option. They certainly expressed that. But I think one thing that we need to be careful of is I don't think it's going to be, well, we recommend nothing. I think they're looking for for something. And then if this board doesn't exercise its expertise, then
my sense is that the village board is very passive and is very like, what should we do?
But they want to do something.
Right. So the options are, you do nothing, meaning it leaves it R1. It becomes R2. We recommend being R2. We recommend PDD, which I think is the better approach because it provides the value of R2, but much more village control. And there is no nothing option other than to go
to keep it R1.
Right. That's the only.
I'm not so sure that's what the board's thinking.
Yeah, they don't. We can't just punt, but that's why I wanted us to have more detailed information to go. This is a 15.5 acre parcel. It's been empty for a long time. You know, there's a long list of things going forward on that. So I just wanted all of us to have more information as we make that decision.
So I think, again, it's already been referred here, so we don't meet for another month. So I think perhaps, John, if you want to put something in the minutes that it's under review and this board fully intends to make a recommendation.
Yeah.
And is requesting more information, then the
Yes.
town board knows we're not
Yeah,
just
we're
gonna.
not just sitting on it.
Right, or that we're not gonna make a recommendation.
Yeah, the village is having a public hearing on August 7th, I believe. That's their,
4th or 7th?
that's their next meeting.
I did see something about that.
It would have been nice to be a little later, but because our action is,
Where did I see that
I mean,
date?
Well, they can always continue the public hearing, can't they?
Or they
Yeah.
can close it and not decide. That's the thing about a zone change, it could go on for a long time. There's no deadline to it, but I particularly think that, John wants to let them know that this board's looking at it.
yes. Yeah, I think
And we
we
intend
should.
to make a recommendation.
Yes.
So, if, and to actively seek that information that you're looking for.
Right.
Or you lose your chance, which
Yeah.
I know that's not.
Well, and yeah, and that's the, whatever recommendation we make, they can accept it or reject it. It's purely advisory.
Right.
So, whatever we do decide at that point, we'll have done our due diligence. We'll, take a vote on whatever it is that we decide and forward that. If there's an odd number of us for a reason, if it happens to be a tie on some different resolutions on that, we would forward that as well.
We could.
Right.
If not a recommendation, certainly do that.
Right, so if the planning board is split based on that, we would pass that along. That's the closest thing we could get to punting. Thanks, Jamie.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Anything else before we adjourn? If not, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn. Chris?
Seconded.
Did someone first do it?
Oh,
Mike.
You didn't hear his head.
Mike, and seconded by Chris. All those in favor? Aye. Have a good month, everybody.